Thank you, Courtney, and thank you to our Outstanding Community Service Award recipients. It's really through your work and your dedication that our network is able to fulfill the mission and promise of community action. So I just want to say how much we appreciate each of you, and I'm excited to hear about the award recipients a little later in the program. So the next portion of our awards luncheon is dedicated to the award recipient, the winner of the Charles Braithwait Leadership Award. We have been blessed in our network to have many great leaders who have helped to shape our Community Action Network and really dedicated their life's work to the movement of community action. I'd like to take just a few moments to recognize two of those leaders before we move on to the award recipient for 2015. The first leader I'd like to recognize is Bill Young. Bill served as the executive director of Ozark Action Incorporated. I used to work at Ozarks Area Community Action Corporation. That's why I did that. In West Plains. He was also president of our state association from 1977 to 1983 and actually helped to found our statewide association. Bill was instrumental in guiding the Community Action Network through the changes from the Community Services Administration funding to the Community Services Block Grant model of funding, which was a difficult transition for our network. For over 42 years, Bill has dedicated his life's work to low-income families as an ardent advocate. Bill passed away on December 19th, 2014, and we want to take a moment to recognize Bill and his dedication to low-income families and the Community Action Network. I'd also like to take a moment to recognize Bill's wife, Judy Young, who continues to dedicate her life's work as the executive director of South Central. Let us please show our appreciation through a round of applause for Bill's work. As you can see in your luncheon agenda, we are here to honor the Charles Braithwait Leadership Award recipient. This is Missouri's premier Community Action Award, and it is given to a member of the Missouri Community Action Network who exemplifies the energy and dedication of Charles Braithwait. Charles Braithwait was a leader, an advocate, and a visionary. He dedicated his life's work to community action. He started at the founding of Community Action as the executive director of West Central Missouri Community Action Agency in Appleton City. He was also instrumental in founding of our statewide association, as well as the National Community Action Foundation, our national lobbying organization. He was also appointed by President Gerald Ford to serve on the Economic Development Commission. Charles provided strong leadership in our field throughout his career and well after retirement. He encouraged others to stay steadfast in their dedication to the community action movement. He has continued to work because for him, community action just wasn't a job. It was a part of who he was. It's a part of all of us. Some of you may not actually know this, but Charles Braithwait actually sued President Nixon when he threatened to dismantle community action. He ultimately won that lawsuit and saved community action. Charles was important to our national network. Charles was important to our Missouri network. Charles was important to you, and he was important to me. Some of you have heard me tell this story, but when I worked at Ozarks Area Community Action Corporation, I got to attend a training with Charles McCann and Charles Braithwait. I had been with the network about 7 months, I think, at that point. Carl had sent me to the training, and it was in that training, in that moment, when I heard Charles Braithwait speak, that I realized that I had found my home in community action, and that this movement and this work was a part of who I was. Charles passed away on October 25th, 2014. We will all miss him. As I have learned in the days since his passing, he was not only a dedicated leader of community action, but he was a dedicated husband, a dedicated father, and a dedicated grandfather. I'd like you to ask me to please welcome to the stage his wife, Sandra Braithwait, who too has dedicated her life to serving families and low-income families through her work and education. Sandra is just as much a part of our network and I'd like you to help me in introducing Sandra to the stage.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. It's wonderful to be here, and it's rather bittersweet because Charles would have loved to have been here. And the day's been hard. It takes a while to learn to live without someone that is your dearest companion. And you make progress, and then things come that kind of throw you a little bit, and today's been somewhat difficult, but we're honored to be here, and we are very, very appreciative of everyone in Missouri who has worked and dedicated their lives to community action. Heather and Courtney, I appreciate so much all you've done, and it has always been a great honor since the day that he retired that MACA chose to honor a recipient each year that demonstrated outstanding leadership qualities in honor of Charles. And his family and I are very, very grateful for that. Before I proceed, I'd like to introduce someone that's very, very important. Charles called her his baby girl. She's the youngest of our children, and her name is Kayla. She's a nurse by profession, although now she's in an administrative educational role in the health industry. But she dedicated 3 months, probably closer to 5 months of her life to helping take care of her dad. And she and her other sister, the one that's closest to her in age, one of them was with him constantly almost. And then after we took him home, Kayla was in Denver with her job, and she got home and she took a chair and put in by his bed, and I don't think she ever left his side then until he passed away 3 days later. And no man was ever given more loving, devoted care than what Charles was given. And Kayla, stand up. She... People are always asking me, since he passed away, to come and to speak a little bit about Charles, and I have some different perspectives than all of you. We lived together 42 and a half years, and he did rise to prominence on the national scene and on the local scene and so forth, and most of the time he was prominent at home, but not always. And I've often been asked, well, how did you all meet? And it was in 1965, and Kayla was 14 days old. And I had moved back to our hometown in Larry City, where he was superintendent of schools. And I was somewhat shattered, defeated, single mother, with 4 little children, and Kayla was 14 days old. And that was in August, and school started about a week later, so I took Paul and Greg, the 2 older ones, to school to enroll them, and it was the first day of school, and it was very hectic and chaotic, and so the superintendent walked out of the office and said, "May we help you?" And I said, "Well, I'd like to enroll my children." And he proceeded to do that. Several weeks later, it was 1960, the Elementary Secondary Education Act was passed, and the federal government began to pump a lot of money into the local schools. So they advertised for 7 positions for paras and teachers and assistant teachers, and I applied. And thought I was as qualified as anyone else that had applied, and a couple weeks went by, and I didn't get the job. I didn't even get an interview. So I called him one morning and I said, well, I noticed that the positions have been filled, and is there any advice that you could give me as to what maybe I might be able to do to maybe get a job later on? And he had the nerve to tell me that I was overqualified. Now, have you ever known a teacher to be overqualified? You're looking at one, according to Charles Braithwait. But anyway, I remember Kayla and Dana were sitting in their high chairs, and I needed a job badly. And I turned around and put the phone down, and I started crying. And I looked at those two little girls, and I said, well, what a jerk. It took him 6 years to dig himself out of that hole. And he later said that, well, he decided then that he'd rather marry me than try to supervise me, so. But it turned out incredibly well. We did get married, and those two little girls and their brother and sister became his. He adopted them, and they had the richest and the finest and the best that life could offer, and I did too. So we owe him much. And so who was he? Everyone wants to know, who was he? What was he really like? Well, as Heather said, he could inspire people. He could rally people. He could build cohesion. He could build collaboration. He could build consensus. He could move people to do great things. And what motivated him, I think, was that he took hold of the war on poverty, and one word was what drove him, I think, and that was the word opportunity. And he believed that everyone deserved an opportunity to have a better life. He believed that everyone, our success most times is due to the opportunities that we're given. And that's another thing that inspired him when Nixon, and those were rough times at home too, when he came home and told me that he was going to sue the President of the United States. But that word opportunity, he saw that as an example of someone denying. First of all, it was illegal, it was immoral, and it was fundamentally wrong. But he saw it more in depth than that it was a denial of the opportunity to help millions and millions of people to have the opportunity to have a better life. And I think that's what drove him, and it drove him till the day that he died. So we're biased, but we think he, too, was a great man. Many people have said many things about him, and Heather, I appreciate so much what you said. But David Bradley, I talked to David yesterday, and he's going to join you tomorrow. Anyway, David Bradley at his funeral, who was a dear friend of his, said about Charles that he was a good man, and it's rare that you can find a good man that's also a great man, and Charles was a good man and a great man. And he also said that Charles would have been successful at whatever he had done, and he would have been. In closing, I'll try to close. I had 5 minutes, I think. But anyway, I'm always asked too, what would he say to us today? I think he would be very, very proud of all of you. I think he'd say, good job, good work. He would also say, continue to run and administer strong, viable agencies that will deliver programs to help people get out of poverty. Not to sustain poverty, but to get out of poverty. Give them that opportunity. He would say that now then probably it'll never be necessary for any of you to sue the president. I hope not, because it's not very pleasant. But that probably will never be an option that any of you will have to explore. because we have some infrastructure in place, so to speak, now. There's NCAF, there's MACA, there's the partnership. Support them. Support them. Okay, how do you support them? Money. It all comes down to money. Now then, I've worked in a community action agency, and I know how difficult it is to motivate people to give up part of their paycheck to pay into something as abstract maybe as NCAF or MACA is. But if you can't appeal to them on the level that is to help poor people, appeal to them on the basis that it's your job. It's your job that we're trying to protect too and to save. So there's a lot to be done still that we might make it down the road 50 more years. Then he also was a huge believer that you've got to advocate at home in your local communities, and you need to train and educate boards. They're vital. A little bit about the award. Charles would love to have been here. He would say this was long overdue. He greatly admired and respected you. And Charles had a term that if he liked you and if he thought you were doing a great job, he'd say, he's a dandy. So I'm sure he'd say that today. When he passed away, the months that we had before he passed away, it gives you opportunity to discuss and talk about a lot of things. And he never wanted to talk about the funeral, but he always said, you just do whatever you want. He said, I don't think anybody will come, so, just do whatever you want. And I said, well, I'm sure that's right. And I said, but if we did have one, would you want anyone particular to have any role? And he mentioned Carl Rosencrantz as a pallbearer. So that says it all. That says it all. Speaking of the Braithwait Award, I appreciate Kayla and I and my children, we wear the Braithwait name with pride, with honor. It's a legacy we cherish, and it has some integrity and value behind it. So I appreciate, Heather, the integrity that you place in selecting the nominees because they do need to be special and worthy. And one final thing, my husband's family had a mercantile store in the 1800s in southwest Missouri. In the early 1900s, they moved it to Bolivar, Missouri. And it ultimately became a fine men's dress store. In 1977, we sold it. And the day that we settled it and the new buyers took over, we met in an attorney's office, and Uncle Herm was all that was left of the original family, and Aunt Betty, and Charles and I were there. And so we'd settled everything, and we were getting ready to sign on the dotted line, and the new buyer said, okay, I want the Braithwait name. And Uncle Herm said, no way. And he offered him $25,000, and this is 1977, $25,000 for the Braithwait name, and Uncle Herb said no. And I thought, ooh, I wish he had asked me. And finally, this discussion went on. He said, okay, I'll give you $50,000 for the Braithwait name. And Uncle Herm said, stop, stop, stop. He said, you don't have enough money to buy my name. And I, again, looked at Aunt Betty, and she looked at me, and I thought, well, I wish she'd ask us. And when we got out, Uncle Herm said, you think I'm crazy, don't you? And he said, we don't know what they're going to do there 10 years from now. So that Braithwait name is precious to us. It has a legacy. It's worth something, and we appreciate the integrity. And Carl, we share it with you with great honor. At this time, I think I'm supposed to introduce Charles McCann, another good friend of Charles's.
Thank you, Sandra. I was just a little concerned, not much, that Sandra might tell you about the day that she and I chased the bull all around the neighborhood at her house. No bull, we really did, didn't we? Yeah. Yeah. Finally got it corralled, boy. Well, we're here to help present MACA's 2015 Charles Braithwait Community Action Leadership Award. Personally, Mr. Braithwait was my mentor. When I became St. Joseph's Head Start Director in 1967, one of my first days on the job was a trip to West Central to visit with the Head Start Director there, Virgil Bannon, about how to administer a good Head Start program. So I heard from Virg. But I also heard from Mr. Braithwait, not just about how to run a good Head Start program, but how to love community action and risk everything for the anti-poverty movement. So Charles and I became acquainted. And over the years, as we worked together in community action, we became friends. And then after a while, good friends. And as we continued teaming on various community action projects, we became close friends. And finally, confidants. Some of you may have seen us together at one of our Community Action Living History presentations. Heather did. And if you did, I'm sure you saw we were as close as brothers and shared the love brothers have for one another. Very few bonds can be stronger than being brothers and sisters in community action. For me, this award says thank you to Charles for what he did for community action. But personally, I thank him for what he did for me. I'm blessed because he taught me to risk everything for community action and to love community action as much as he did. Literally, that has made all the difference in my life. And I want that for you, too. Now I have the honor and pleasure of introducing last year's Charles Braithwait Award recipient. An introduction in two parts. First, an introduction using facts about this wonderful person. Proud grandmother with a refined appreciation for joy and love. 15 years in the community action movement. MACA board member 4 years and secretary of her professional alliance. MACA chapter officer over 7 years. CCAP mentor, national examination proctor, and member of Missouri's CCAP to Next Level task force. Over 15 years service at the Adair County Detention Center, where she holds jail ministry for women inmates. Animal lover, avid reader, gardener, and writer. Now, facts like this say a lot about a person, but they don't tell the full story. There are other ways to be known and remembered. Sometimes when a colleague introduces me to someone, the introducer will say the person being introduced is a community action person. And without discussing it, I know what that means. There's no place to find a community action person defined, but community action people know what that means. Last year's Charles Braithwait Award recipient, as well as this year's, is a community action person. So I complete her introduction by introducing a community action person. She sees community action as the calling it is, rather than a job. She embraces community action vision, values, and ethics, both in concept and practice. She is willing to work long hours for low pay, doing the difficult tasks community action demands. She knows community action is about eliminating poverty, not merely making poverty more tolerable. She accepts the ethical and legal reality that community action includes both empowering people and revitalizing communities. She understands what Charles Braithwait was teaching just last year in a video produced for the National Partnerships Conference. That although community action agencies' principal activity may be to operate programs, it is not the primary objective, which is to use the programs as bridges into the community, causing the entire community to become more aware of and responsive to poverty conditions and causes. After all, it was she who arranged for Dr. Donna Beagle to present in Kirksville. So it is with pleasure and my honor that I give you the 2014 recipient of MACA's Charles Braithwait Annual Community Action Leadership Award, a wonderful person, a community action person, Miss Vicki Grindy, CCAP.
Goodness. Well, not only is it a great honor to announce this year's Charles Braithwait winner, but I want to tell you I am a lot less nervous than I was last year. I figured all I had to worry about was, do I have any asparagus stuck in my front teeth? And then Sandra so eloquently spoke, and then I had to think about the mascara tears down my face. You've touched us all, just like your husband has. Okay, let me set the stage, just a little, if you will. Imagine a young man, fresh out of college. The world is his canvas. What shall he paint? What will his medium be? Oh, let's just give him a Boston accent and a penchant for helping others. This young man, hears of a relatively new program called Vista and decides, hey, I'm going to give it a whirl. Well, this whirl turned into a dance that has lasted for 43 and a half years. From Vista volunteer to executive director has been the life's work of this year's recipient. This dance of helping his fellow man has never stopped, and his dance card remains full. Quoting him directly, he says, "I have learned over the years that we have to listen to people in our communities in order to know how to accomplish our goals." Now, I met our recipient, approximately 12 years ago at a MACA conference, of all places. And since then, I have worked with him on the MACA Board of Directors in various capacities. He is our go-to person when talking about bylaws, our community action, and MACA history. He gives the credit of his successes to having a great staff, an informed board of directors, and an engaged policy council. Maybe we should throw in a little humility as well. I would also think that his success stems greatly from the fact that he's just an all-around, hard-working, good guy who has integrity and has formed a firm bond with his agency's mission of assisting people in becoming more self-sufficient. In other words, he's not afraid of hard work and long hours. He has a keen sense of humor, a rather dry wit. He loves sports, has adopted more than his share of cats over his lifetime, has extreme fatherly pride in the careers and lives of his two daughters, Amanda and Jennifer, and his grandchildren. I should also mention that at the beginning of his journey with Community Action, back in the days of being a Vista volunteer, he met and fell in love with a school teacher who lived next door. Her name was Barbara, who later became his wife. Perhaps it was synchronicity, or perhaps it was God's hand in guiding Carl's long career with Community Action. But it seems to me that our friend, Carl Rosencrantz, Vista volunteer, former Maca and Makeda board president, former Maca vice president, current Maca historian, OCAC Integrity Award winner, 40-year executive director of OCAC, 43-year OCAC employee, all-around community action guru, loving father and husband, still has a lot of dance moves left in his amazing career of serving and caring for his fellow man. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in congratulating Carl Rosencrantz in receiving the Charles Braithwait Leadership Award.
Okay. Okay, I know. Thank you. This award says, it's given to me, for exemplifying the standards of leadership, dedication, and energy demonstrated by this outstanding national leader, May 6, 2015. Parts of my story have already been told by people, which is fine, but it's really important to get this award, and my biggest regret, as Sandra said, is that Charles is not here to see this. He would have been so pleased with this moment, and we used to talk about it on time to time when I met them. And there's really nothing I can say except that it's my time. And it's important to talk a little bit about what I do, and then talk a little bit about what Charles did. I know this is an individual award, but in my way of thinking, it couldn't happen without the combined efforts of a lot of people. The OCAC employees, the board members, policy council members, and other OCAC volunteers. We're all doing our best to carry out our mission, to help people improve their quality of life through the programs and services we provide. And I'm very thankful for the fact that I've had the opportunity to be in community action since I became a Vista volunteer in 1970. And also been with MACA since the early years, when there were a lot of stories about how everything came together, came apart, came together. And here we are today at a conference that is headed by a former OCAC employee. Thank you, Heather. But in talking about Charles, I had the privilege of working with him when he was at West Central for over 22 years when we were executive directors in adjoining agencies. Then after he retired in 1996, occasionally I saw him. He was very busy in a lot of community action endeavors, and we would talk a little bit about what was going on, my agency, his agency, and I really appreciated his friendship over the years. It's hard to put that into words sometimes when you, here's somebody who was part of the group that sued the president, and when he was doing that, I was around in my agency. I wasn't the director yet, but I was fully aware of what he was involved in because I was trying to translate that into what that would mean for OCAC, and it was very important to know, and I told him a couple of times that I appreciated his work. But when I became an executive director, the second day of my employment, I went to Columbia to a director's meeting, my first meeting, and he was one of the first people I saw. And it was very important at that time to talk to people that I knew, and I really appreciate that. But more so, when I visited with Charles and Sandra several times last year in Springfield, we talked about what I was doing, but most of it was Charles talking about community action, past, present, and future. That was his passion. And all I did was I sat there, I listened, and I learned. He was very alert. He wanted to talk about what he thought was going on. But I think it is better, there's a better perspective on this. I have a letter from him dated August 2nd, 2012. I never throw anything away. And in this letter, we had another visit in July, and again, we talked about this award, and we talked about community action. But he said in the letter that he felt that we as community action leaders should possess leadership, integrity, compassion, selfless dedication to our ideals, compassion to the poor, and determination to do the right thing with the tools given to us. He was a strong advocate for community action, and I will miss him. And I thank you for this honor.